Good evening. I'm Jonathan Capehart in for Joy Reid. We begin tonight with a slew of legal developments today on multiple fronts, all involving the many criminal cases of Donald Trump and his associates, starting with Peter Navarro, a former advisor in the Trump White House who just a short time ago was found guilty by a D.C. jury on 2 counts of criminal contempt of Congress for refusing to comply with a subpoena from the House January 6th Select Committee last year. In their closing arguments, prosecutors told jurors that Navarro, quote, thinks he's above the law, and in this country, nobody is above the law. In that same building, the grand jury that indicted Trump for election interference met today for the first time since handing up those charges more than 4 weeks ago, an indication that their investigation is ongoing, which could potentially spell bad news for the 6 unnamed co-conspirators listed in that indictment. Meanwhile, in Georgia, attorneys for Trump today notified the judge presiding over his criminal racketeering case that he may seek to move his state case to federal court, something several of his co-defendants are also asking for, though the judge has yet to issue a ruling. And Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis is proving once again that she is not to be messed with, issuing a scathing rebuke to Republican House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan after he demanded that the DA hand over a series of documents related to her indictment of Trump. In her response, Willis did not hold back, accusing Congressman Jordan of overstepping his congressional authority and obstructing her prosecution, writing in part, "Your job description as a legislator does not include criminal law enforcement, nor does it include supervising a specific criminal trial because you believe that doing so will promote your partisan political objectives." She goes on to say, "Your letter makes clear that you lack a basic understanding of the law, its practice, and the ethical obligations of attorneys generally and prosecutors specifically." There's a lot happening here, and here to discuss all of it, we have Soumya Dayananda, former senior investigator on the House January 6th Select Committee, Renato Mariotti, former federal prosecutor, and Hugo Lowell, political investigations reporter for The Guardian. Thank you all very much for coming to the readout. Soumya, I'll start with you as someone who was part of the House Select Committee's investigation. What's your reaction to the Navarro verdict?
Well, I think for those of us who served on the committee, it's another day of accountability, and it's also a day of affirming the committee's work. We had the congressional authority to investigate the facts and circumstances that led to January 6th. And as part of that, we interviewed close to 1,000 witnesses. And the vast majority of them came in and cooperated with the committee. And if they were going to assert a privilege, they did so in front of a committee staffer. As part of our fact-finding, Peter Navarro was identified as one of the key players who made efforts to overturn the 2020 election. So as part of the investigation, we had the authority to question him. We had the authority to subpoena him. And when he did not show up on that day, he was referred to the Department of Justice. So I think what viewers should be reassured by is that there was a process, and that now, by this verdict, we see that no one is above the law, and that the common sense of D.C. jurors really held him accountable. And this is what we expect to see with additional trials in the future for the former president and his allies.
Mm-hmm. Renato, moving on to this brutal letter from Fani Willis to Jim Jordan, she goes on to write that if Congress were to follow through on their threats to deny this office federal funds, you will be deciding to allow serial rapists to go unprosecuted, hate crimes to be unaddressed, and to cancel programs for at-risk children. She also listed a number of suggestions for productive activity by the Judiciary Committee. And she says that since Jordan seems to have a personal interest in her office, quote, you should consider directing the U.S. DOJ to investigate the racist threats that have come to my staff and me because of this investigation. Renato, your reaction to that blistering letter at 9 pages long?
Well, look, I will just say one thing about Fani Willis. She has a very much take no prisoners attitude. She lays down the law. She sets hard lines. She's done that with Donald Trump. And now she's doing that with Jim Jordan. And I have to say there's definitely an element here in which she's taking this a little personally. She is sick of all the attacks she's sick of the way in which people are threatening her. And I get it. I was threatened myself when I was a prosecutor. I was in protective custody for a period of time. It is not a fun situation to be in. And so, basically what she's telling Jim Jordan is she's calling him out on the fact that this is really a political game. The United States Congress really has no role, as she points out, in regulating local law enforcement. His supposed reason for investigating her is that he wants to see what's happening with federal funds. And her point is that, look, federal funds are being used to prosecute crimes. The fact that you don't like one person I'm prosecuting, the fact that you have a political agenda doesn't mean that I do. And that's exactly where she wants to be. I think that's exactly the sort of strong response that she needs. And frankly, she's calling his bluff.
Right. I mean, this letter is very strong. And in fact, she throws his own words back at him. She writes, furthermore, your note calls to mind another letter recently submitted to a House Select Committee. Quote, this unprecedented action serves no legitimate legislative purpose and would set a dangerous precedent for future Congresses. See letter from Congressman Jim Jordan to Chairman Benny Thompson dated January 9th, 2022. Soumya, I would love to get your reaction to DA Fani Willis's letter.
I think it is incredibly well written and methodically refutes the so-called legitimacy of this Jim Jordan inquiry. I think the ability for the DA, similar to Alvin Bragg in Manhattan, to really try to shut down this inquiry in this public manner by filing a 9-page letter really also educates the country as to what the purpose of a congressional committee should be. And you can juxtapose what Jim Jordan is doing with what the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack did. We had a legislative purpose and we followed that purpose. And Jim Jordan is certainly not doing that here.
Hugo, let me bring you into the conversation. Congressional Republicans have made almost their entire agenda centered around playing Donald Trump's legal team and investigating the investigators. Do you think Fani Willis's letter will change anything, or is Jim Jordan just going to double down?
I don't think it's going to change anything. What we should always remember is when congressional Republicans are going after these prosecutors, whether it's Fani Willis or whether it's Jack Smith, the special counsel, it's in order to help Trump, right? Trump doesn't have a visibility into a lot of these, the investigations, into the indictments, into what prosecutors are thinking. And so what he's effectively doing is getting the House Republican Conference and Jim Jordan to do his dirty work for him and to send letters and subpoenas and to try and get some sort of intel from these prosecutors' offices to figure out kind of what's going on and what might, come down the line. I think it was very notable that one of the letters that Jordan sent previously to Fani Willis was if she had had any contact with federal investigators in Jack Smith's office. And that, I think, is a telltale sign that Trump is really just trying to get intel.
And Hugo, there's other news out of Georgia with Trump signaling today he might seek to move his Fulton County case to federal court, but he hasn't actually decided. What's the thought process of Trump's legal team here?
Yeah, I checked in with a couple of Trump's lawyers and people in his inner circle, and it seems to be that they are waiting for Mark Meadows, his former chief of staff, to see whether or not he can get his case removed to federal court. And they want to see and use Meadows as like a guinea pig, as like a test balloon to see whether his arguments fly and how kind of a federal judge might react before they jump in and potentially file their own removal motion themselves. I think to that end, the notice to the judge in Fulton County today that he may soon file a removal motion is more aimed to the judge to say, look, before you decide anything more in the Fulton County case and whether or not you can have all these co-defendants tried together in October, or, if before you make any more deliberations, you should take into account that Trump at some point is going to remove his case to federal court.
So then, Renato, what's the likelihood of this judge actually allowing Trump or any of his co-defendants to do that?
I think it's very unlikely that Trump would be allowed to remove his case. Mark Meadows has an uphill battle, but he has some things going for him in that he had a smaller role than Trump. Trump was the ringleader, and there were some elements of this RICO enterprise that did involve some official acts, and so that's really what the judge, who's an Obama appointee, a good judge, what he's really grappling with here. He doesn't have a lot of precedent. He's grappling with, well, if there's a small piece of this that was part of his official duties, is that enough to support removal? I don't think ultimately at the end of the day the judge is going to conclude that. But Meadows is making a calculated risk. And as Hugo said, Trump's team is sort of sitting on the sidelines, waiting to see if Meadows succeeds. If he wins his gamble, then Trump might be more willing to take a gamble himself.